everyone, welcome back. I'm Michael Sandler, your host on Inspire Nation. If you've ever struggled with terrible loss or can't find your way out of the darkness, then do we have the Becoming Starlight show for you. Today I'll be talking with psychologist and minister Dr. Sharon Prentice, the author of a brilliant book on SDEs and coming into the light, Becoming Starlight. And that's just what I want to talk with her about today, about a shared death journey from darkness to light and what it means for all of us. That plus we'll talk about orange Naugahyde furniture, Burgundy Nova Supersports, the King's Head Inn, readings at the local head shop, First Landing State Park, punting and weddings that is, bohemian, jean-wearing, long-haired, quasi-intellectual, seemingly introspective, radical poet types, gotcha, and what in the world Wayne Dyer and sharing a banana has to do with anything. So
Hi,
welcome
Mike.
to the show, Sharon.
Hi, Michael. Thank you for having me. This is great. I love that intro. And
Woohoo!
hearing it all at one time is it just takes me back. It takes me back. It's wonderful. Thank you.
Excellent. So I guess the answer to the question, are you ready to shine, is very clear now, isn't it?
Very clear. This is great. This is great. This is great. Thank you.
So I was going to dive into, I am going to walk us through your journey. But before we do that, I can't resist. What in the world does sharing a banana and Wayne Dyer have to do with anything?
One of my very last meetings with Dr. Dyer before he died, he was such an amazing man. And he was my long distance mentor living in Hawaii and where I am. And the last time I saw him, we were in Fort Lauderdale. And Wayne is actually the one that talked me into writing Becoming Starlight. And he was doing, he liked to do these sessions where he would bring people in who were thinking of writing, and he would be talking to everybody. And when he took a break, we were actually sitting in the hallway. All the other seats were gone, so we were actually sitting on the floor in a hotel in Fort Lauderdale, and I had a banana, and he didn't have anything, so we split the banana, and he and I are sitting on the floor in this really, ritzy hotel, sharing a banana, talking about writing the book. So it was an interesting time. He was such a great man and such a love and so very, very generous. So I figured the least I could do is share my banana with him.
And he wanted you to share something else, didn't he?
Yes, he did. Yes, he did. We had talked about my experience on numerous occasions, and he kept telling me, you need to write this, you need to write this. So I had absolutely no earthly idea where to even begin. And so I actually did say to him, how am I supposed to start this? What am I supposed to say?
Yeah.
And he said, tell the story, Sharon. Always tell the story. So that's exactly what I did. I went in and made myself extremely vulnerable, and I told the story from start to finish. Thanks to him.
Thank you, Wayne. Woohoo!
Yes, absolutely. He was. It was a great loss, great loss when we lost him.
So absolutely. And I was living on Maui up until just before then, and our paths never quite crossed. There was a history with Hay House, and our paths were meant to come just close for whatever reason. I think to maybe guide and tinker my journey from the other side.
Yeah. The very last conversation I had with him, I was halfway through Starlight, and I did say to him, do you think that Stephanie and Steve will know about Starlight? And he looked at me and he said, honey, they already do. So it was just, heart-wrenching, because that's the kind of guy he was. He really was.
So going from there, if we go back in time, let's go to your earliest days. What was your religious background growing up?
I was Southern Baptist. My parents were, Virginia, Southern Virginia.
Yeah.
Southern Baptist, man, from the go-get. My grandparents lived in South Carolina, so of course Southern Baptist, and we were just kind of melded into that. Mm-hmm. My dad was in the Air Force, so we traveled all over the world, and wherever there was always some form of Baptist somewhere. But we did go from Southern Baptist to Methodist to American Baptist, but it was always in that Protestant vein where you learn only what they want you to learn. You sit there as a child and you listen to the minister saying exactly what he wants you to know. And they use a lot of fear and, all of that type of this is who God is and you better be a good little girl. So that's what I grew up thinking, that God was this outside entity and that I needed to be a good little girl. And if I was, and everything would be fine. As a child, I think all children, in whatever denomination you are in,
Mm.
you are given these pictures of what you are supposed to believe. And as children, we need those pictures because we don't have that abstract thinking going on yet. And so when some adult who appears to be an authority is telling you, this is what God looks like, and this is what heaven looks like, and this is what hell looks like, and this is what you had better look like, and you had better believe, we believe those things. And I would come to find out years later that that was just totally missing the mark. And I spent many, many years suffering because of that till I found my way into what is my truth.
Along your way, what's interesting is when you got to college,
Hmm.
all the beliefs were falling apart. Everything. I mean, the country was being torn
Yes,
apart at the very fabric or very threads.
yes.
So, what was going on while you were in college, and then what happened?
While I was in college, well, number one, I didn't want to be in college.
Yeah.
I was there because my dad said, "You're going to college." So I said, "Okay." I mean, he was my dad, and he was my rock. He always had been. And so I started, and he picked all my classes, and it was
Wow.
geography and calculus and physics, and where my brain would just fog over. I had no earthly idea what any of that was. So when I got there, I didn't go to class. I didn't want anything to do with class. But the campus community was involved in the anti war protests. I mean, very, very much anti war protests. So we had different factions always fighting each other because everybody thought they knew what was the best. And of course, right down the street were the military bases. So we had the Marines and the Navy and some of the Coast Guard, and we would pass each other all the time, and it was just this constant struggle. People don't remember now when they hear a protest, they don't understand what it was really like. This was toward the end of the Vietnam War. Thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of people would hit the streets. And a lot of what you see was violence, but a lot of it was just really loud protest. And since my father was in the military, I didn't go totally whole hog into that type
Yeah.
of protest because I would never disrespect him. And yet I wanted to fit in, with the college crowd that I belonged in. So I kind of skirted, stayed right on the outside of it so that I wasn't terribly involved in either of them, just enough to get my feet wet. So that it was such a time of upheaval. It really was.
Yeah, my dad talks with me about that time and how he was recruited into the army as well, just out of law school. And he says the
Right.
country was literally being ripped apart at its
Yes.
seams. So,
It had been, it had been. My dad had spent 2 tours in Vietnam, and, I mean, he was a career guy. He spent 30 years in the Air Force, and when he came back after a second tour, he was like, "I don't know why we're there. I don't know why we're there." And he totally changed too from seeing and being part of the political nonsense that was going on at the time. So there was just upheaval everywhere, inside the military as well as outside.
I guess I should use the correct word. He wasn't recruited, he was drafted. But let's go from there. Let's talk
Okay?
about the King's Head Inn because if ever universe was conspiring to put a fork in your side.
That was it. That was it. Right across the street from the college. Just as a side note here, they just tore it down last year,
Oh,
which was so horrible. But right across the street from the college was the King's Head Inn. It was a bar and a restaurant, and it was the college hangout for everybody. You skipped class, that's where you went. After class, that's where you went. At night, that's where you went. And everyone was there. Matter of fact, it was funny because a lot of the classes that I would skip, I would be there. And then after the class was over, a professor would come in whose class it was that I had just skipped. So that was, and we would just sit there and talk. He'd see me and he'd point at me and say, "You." I'm like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, I know." But that was the place everyone went. And that was actually where I met Steve.
now Steve walks in. What's he dressed in, and what does he do with his eyes?
Steve was military, and he came in on a Saturday night, and Saturday nights were like everybody was there, every group, you could think of. And we would all just meld together because the one thing we all had in common was this war thing, and everybody was against that. So I don't care if you were a jock or a sorority girl or fraternity or whatever you were, everybody melded. And about 11 o'clock at night, in walks these three guys in full military uniform. The whole place just silence. And he and his two friends were standing up against the door. And I was sitting not on the other side of the room, but more toward the middle to the other side of the room. And everybody just looked over the door, and we were all thinking, what in God's name are those people doing here? Why are they here? Because military did not come in there. And I happened to notice one of them who was staring a hole through me. He was his eyes were so fixated on me, and he had this smirk on his face, And I'm not intimidated by very much. Even back then, I wasn't. I considered myself, the rebel. And, when you're a kid, and he just would not take his eyes off me. And it intimidated me. So I dropped my eyes. And yet, at the same time, I didn't want to drop my eyes. I wanted to keep looking at him. And that's exactly what I did. It was this little game, where he was staring at me and smirking because he knew he was making me uncomfortable. And then at one point, he actually came over to the table and he just sat down. And I didn't know whether to be highly offended or intimidated or talk. I had no idea what to do to him, with him. And he's just staring at me and just started talking. And I'm thinking, who is this guy? What do you want? And from there, it just turned into something that I never expected it to be.
What did he say to you? And then what happened 2 weeks later when he shows up at your parents' place?
Oh, that was amazing. I actually got up and left the table at one point because he was asking so many questions, and he actually reached across the table and pushed my hair out of my eyes. And I remember thinking, "Oh, who is this guy? He's invading my space." And I wouldn't give him, my real name or phone number. I wouldn't give him anything. And at one point, I was so intimidated by it, I got up and went up to the bar and was just standing there hoping that he would go away. But he didn't go away. He sat there and continued to talk to my friends. And at one point we just left, and he sat there at the table, but we left. And he kept going back to the inn. He kept going back and going back and going back until he ran into one of my friends that he recognized. And he talked her into giving him my name and address and phone number, the whole thing. And he showed up at my house. I was not home. He showed up at my house, and my dad answered the door. And here he was in dress uniform because Barbara had told him that, we were military. And when my dad answered the door, he stuck his hand out and he said, "Hello, sir. My name is Steve, and I'm going to marry your daughter." And my dad just looked at him and he said, "Well, good luck with that, son." So that was how it started.
And when did you go on your first date?
We went on our first date, I want to say about 2 weeks after that. And I remember thinking as I was getting into the car, this is never, ever going to work. We were so different, so very different. And I thought, no, it's not going to work. And he took me to McDonald's. Do you believe that? He took me to McDonald's. And then we just went. He had a maroon Chevy Super Sport, one of these cars, and we went and we sat down at the beach and we ate our McDonald's, and bam, it was just this thing, as you said, it's just the universe. There was no getting away from it, and it was just the way it was supposed to be.
With my wife, Jessica, she says, "I didn't fall in love with you. I was conscripted."
Yeah, I love that. I'm going to steal that. That's great. I like that.
Because I knew the second I saw her. But unlike Steve's confidence, I said, "Oh crap, she's the one. I better not say anything and ruin it."
I asked him, weeks later, "What were you doing there? Why did you come there?" And he said, "Because I was looking for you." And I thought, oh, this guy, this is it. And he just knew the minute he walked in and he saw me, that was it. And I think on a lot of levels, I knew too. I didn't want to because he was military, and I really didn't want to go back into the military life, traveling around as much as we did. But I think that's why I was as intimidated by him as I was, because I knew, okay, everything I said I didn't want is standing right there at the door, and that's going to be my future.
It's interesting that you say everything that I don't want is standing right there, which Jessica too. I was long haired, kind of hippie looking. She didn't know
Yeah.
what to make out of me. But if we fast forward to your wedding, another example of dream wedding and not getting what I want.
Yes, yes, it was what I thought. I thought I wanted the great big, fancy wedding. And I remember going for the wedding gown fittings and, all the stuff that every new bride wants to do. And the military got in the way. He got orders and he had to report in like 3 weeks or 3 or 4 weeks. And we were heading to Chicago. And there wasn't any time. So I remember saying to my parents, what are we going to do? And my dad, once again, he said, we're just going to step back and punt. And I did not have the great big huge wedding. I wore my older sister's wedding dress, and my mom and dad made the cake, and it was a funny little cake. Mom just went to the store and scraped off the happy birthday or whatever it was, and wrote, congratulations, to me and Steve on the top of the cake. And we did a reception at my house with my family, and our honeymoon night was spent there at my parents' house with them. And it was the most magnificent, peaceful wedding and wedding night that I could have ever hoped for. I really wish that other people would do things like that and realize that one day that you put so much money and effort and all of that into it, that's not at all. I'm so glad it happened the way it happened.
The word that comes to mind is presence.
Yes. Yes, we were. We were in that moment because we knew that moment would never come again. That was the only moment that we had with my parents, having just gone through, a wedding ceremony and starting a new life and leaving another one. We were all there together, and it was just marvelous, just marvelous. We were so glad. We talked about it for many years afterwards, that we were so glad it happened that way.
So going from there, you used an interesting phrase. You said new life.
Yes.
You got pregnant. It's I don't know how soon, but you got pregnant after that.
Yes. Yep.
How
Yep.
was that?
Well, we went to Chicago, and that was a trip all in itself, coming from Virginia Beach into the middle of Chicago. It's like culture shock. It was great, but we ended up getting a little apartment, if you want to call it an apartment. It was the upstairs of a big house that somebody had just nailed up a piece of plywood, but it was home, and I loved it. And it was 4 months after we were married that I found out I was pregnant, and it was absolute joy. I didn't even consider the fact that pregnancy was a possibility. My mind wasn't there. I was thinking, okay, I'm going to go back to school. Where am I going to go? What am I going to do? What is Steve going to end up doing with his? So pregnancy wasn't even on the map, but it was absolutely glorious for a short period of time until the illness started. And then it became just every day was trauma.
And what was that like? How long did that last? And how were you? One of the interesting things in reading this was that through the worst of it, it seemed like you were connecting with your baby on such a deep level and really
Yes.
saying, hang in there. We're in this together.
Yeah, yeah, I did connect with her. I didn't know if it was a him or her, but for some reason I always called it her. Um, I knew that there was a great possibility of losing her. They told me from the very beginning that not only could I lose her, but I could lose my own life at the time. I was very, very ill. I couldn't even keep water down. It was funny. The only thing I could keep down was chocolate. As
That's so
everybody says to
cool.
me, isn't that just the coolest thing? That's why to this day I still call chocolate manna from the heavens, because that was the
Amen.
only thing that I could keep down. I couldn't even keep water down, and I was in the hospital constantly. So I would talk to myself, and that conversation became talking to her. I would put my hands down here, and I would talk to her, and I would just pray with her, and I would just let her know how much she was loved and how much joy she was bringing to me at that moment, and I would convince myself to talk to her about the future and all of the things that we were going to do in the future. And yet every single day I would have to remind myself, even when I didn't want to remind myself, that there were certain things I needed to do to make sure that I could get her here safely. And this went on for 6.5 months when I finally went into premature labor. And at the time, they didn't have the neonatal things like they have nowadays. And so I just knew that I was going to lose her. And that was the defining moment of my life. Up until that point, everything had been wonderful. I was that little girl that the ministers all said, "You be good. Don't you do this and don't you do that, and everything's going to be perfect." And I would pray and pray and pray. I would talk to her, and I would talk to myself, and I would talk to God, this God I thought I knew, this thing outside of me, and I would just pray and beg and everything I could possibly do to make sure that she was okay. And I figured, okay, I'm doing the right things. She's going to survive. And when she didn't, that was the defining moment for me when my life, everything that I believed in, everything just changed.
You just brought me back. I was racing bicycles in Europe a long time ago, trying to make it to the Tour de France. I was waved by a safety official in a French race in a little town called Holville up in the mountains.
Yeah.
Waved by a safety official through a blind turn, everybody cheering, right into an elderly woman's full-size Peugeot sedan. She had managed to get her car onto the course down an alley, didn't realize it, hit me, flipped me over, snapped a leg in two. And as I lay on the ground and I was in so much pain after I looked and saw what happened, I wanted to chew the pavement with my teeth and I resisted. I said, "You'll regret that." And I had for weeks pavement stuck in my fingernails from digging in with the pain into the pavement.
Oh my God.
But I said to myself, God is dead. There
Yes.
is no God.
Yes. Yes. That is exactly the way I was. When Stephanie was born and they put her in my arms, it still is emotional to me. It still is. They put her in my arms and I could feel her breathing. I could hear her. And I held her so tightly. And I prayed. I begged, Michael. This wasn't praying. I was begging. Okay. I promised. I bargained. I bargained with God. Let her live. Take me. That's fine. I would gladly go. Let her stay. And I begged and I begged and I bargained and I did everything that I could possibly do. But she died. And I felt her take her last breath. And when she took that last breath, something was born in me that I did not know was humanly possible. It was this rage. This rage came out of my soul that I did not know was possible. And my hatred, just hatred of God, if one existed, became the impetus for every single day of my life. I was going to teach him, if he existed, a lesson. I went kind of back and forth where I would say, I don't believe in God. Not at all, because if there is a God, he's mean, he's horrible, he's awful, he's evil. I went from that to, yeah, there's a God, and I'm going to teach him that he can't do these things to people who have followed the rules that he set up. And that became my dark night of the soul, if you want to put it that way, where I was bitter and angry and hateful and so full of rage and I set up what I call this existential war. Okay. I was going to beat God and beat death at their own games, and didn't work out so well. But her death, that is what caused my break from everything that had gone on previously in my life.
If we go from there, I'm going to skip past just in the nature of time, the cliffs of La Jolla, the dragon tree, and I'm going to bring you forward
Yes.
to another defining moment in both of your lives, another I don't know that I want to call it game, but we'll call it a training, SEER, and
Yes.
what took place there.
Okay. SEER training is what they put the military through when they are going into war zones. Okay. Yeah. And that's exactly where Steve got orders. He was going to be a military advisor. He would be out in the field he may have at the time he was in Vietnam, like I said earlier, and he would have had a Vietnam guide, but he would have been out in the field by himself looking for where the enemy was. And so he had to go through SEER training. It's survival, evasion, resistance, and escape. And they needed to learn these things because if he was ever captured out there, he needed to know these so that he could survive, whatever would happen to him. And so we moved out to San Diego because that's where the SEER training was. And he would be gone for days and days and days at a time. And it's a very, very hard training. There's some movies out there about SEER training that show a little bit of it, but it's very difficult emotionally, psychologically, physically, everything.
You actually mention it in the book that it's in many ways as dangerous as what they're going to put him in.
Absolutely, absolutely, because they put them through every single possibility that could happen to them. Mm-hmm. And they can do it here because it's safe. No one's going to die. Okay, they're going to keep them safe. So they have that so they can put them through everything that an enemy would put them through, and see how their body and their mind would handle it all. So that's what he was going through. And he was getting sick. I could see it. And I was hoping that they would see it because we hadn't lost Stephanie, but, a few months before we moved, and I was still very separated from him, from everybody, because I didn't want to talk about what had happened to me. Go ahead.
The wall that had to be up just to literally keep you alive at that point meant inherently there couldn't be this closeness for the moment.
Right. I think I said in the book something like, I built a fortress around me. When we got our apartment in San Diego, I made absolutely sure it was an adult facility because I did not want to see children. I could not take the sound of a child's laughter. And I had this fortress up around me, and I kept everybody out. Steve, my parents, ministers, of course, even friends. I didn't want to share because it was almost like if I shared my feelings that I would be losing her. I wanted to keep her tightly inside of me instead of giving her away. And I thought by giving my feelings away, I would be giving her away. So I didn't share with anyone. And I saw that he was getting sick, and I'd separated myself from him. And when he would try to talk to me, I would just shut it down. And he was having trouble expressing too. And all the while, he's having this emotional upheaval as well as the physical from the SEER training. And when he would come home, I would see that he was sick and getting sicker and sicker and sicker until he finally came home after the 2 weeks. And he said, honey, I'm out. He was devastated by that because he was a really strong guy, and he really wanted to serve his country, but he couldn't. And no one knew what was wrong with him. We just knew that he was getting very, very sick. I mean, I was very happy that he wasn't going to go off to war. I was very happy with that because to me, that just meant another death that I wouldn't be able to handle. So that was a rough time.
Oh. And fast forwarding from there, and I have been to the cliffs at La Jolla, and
isn't it just that's my heaven. That's my heaven.
So I can picture the birds in the updraft. So and the last time I was there, they actually had a whole bunch of, I don't know why, it was like this miracle that happened. It was so colorful. All of these paragliders came out and were soaring up above it. All of these amazing colors. It was incredible.
Yeah. It is beautiful. And my bench is still there, and my dragon tree is still there. And we go out once every year or so, and I sit in the same place. I took my son there. I sit in the same place under the same tree, and I just feel like we still know each other because I came back to life for a little bit there.
Woohoo! Now, you mentioned son.
Yes.
So what happened from there?
I have the most amazing, amazing son that God ever put on this planet. He is my lifeline and he's my best friend. And it's just wonderful. It's just wonderful. That too was a very, very difficult pregnancy. I almost lost him. But when the doctors told me that I could lose him and lose me, the same thing that they told me with Stephanie, I looked around until I found somebody that said, "Nat, we're going to get you through this. We are going to get you through this, and you're going to have a healthy baby, and everything's going to be fine." And that's exactly what happened.
8 months. Jessica's still exhausted on a daily
Yes.
basis here. 8 months in bed. Wow.
Yeah, it was. I actually had to move home. I had to move home with my parents, and they turned their dining room into a bedroom for me so that I could be around everybody instead of being isolated in an upstairs bedroom. They took out the dining room table and everything and put a bed in there, and that's where I stayed. The doctor actually came to see me when she called me one day and she says, "You ready to have that baby?" I said, "I am." And so she came over and she said, "Stand up." So I'm like, okay. And it took a couple people to get me to stand up because I hadn't used my legs in so long. And he was actually born not quite 3 hours later. So,
Wow.
yeah.
What were the emotions going on when he was born?
To say I was terrified
Yeah.
would not, that's not even the correct word. But I was also so ecstatic. I just wanted to get my hands on him and I wanted to feel him and I wanted to hear him breathing and I wanted to look into his eyes and I wanted to see this healthy, healthy baby so that I could say, "You're here, you're here, you're mine. No one is going to take you from me." And it was all of those things all jumbled up together. It was just, beyond any emotion that I could have expected, and I would not let go of him. When they came, once you have a baby, they come and they want to do all kinds of things to him. I'm like, "Go away! This child's mine. You cannot have him." And I held on to him a little longer than they wanted me to. But the next day, I mean, when it was time for me to go home, they said I couldn't take him because he had gotten jaundiced, and I would not leave the hospital. I stayed right there. I watched everything that was going on because that was a terrifying moment for me because I'm thinking, "Oh, no, 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 you cannot do this to me again. You cannot do this to me again." So I stayed, but he was okay. He was okay. So it was heart-wrenching there for a while. But he's well and he's fine and he's wonderful and he's great and he's beautiful.
Woohoo!
I know, I know.
Unfortunately, you said, "Don't do this to me again."
Yeah,
Tell
God.
us about the diagnosis with Steve.
Uh, wow. For years, we didn't know what was wrong with him. Steve was an electronic warfare officer, and he helped design the electronic warfare that's on our battleships. And he was so in love with what he did. He was so enamored with everything that he was learning that he would go into these little rooms and he was constantly bombarded by things that the human body is never supposed to be bombarded with. And he was getting sicker and sicker and sicker and sicker. And he'd go to the doctor, and the doctor would say, "Oh, it's nothing," or "You just have an upset stomach," or whatever it was. But I knew it was more than this because he was also losing weight at the same time, and he was vomiting, and he was all of these things, and we haunted the doctors. But then he got put on sea duty, and he was gone out to sea where they have medics or whatever, and it was just terrifying for me. This actually went on for 8 years, 8 long years of not knowing what was wrong. And we were in the military system at the time. He was finally medically discharged because nobody could find out what was wrong with him. And when that happened, we said, "This is it. We're going to go to a civilian." And so I took him to a civilian doctor that I had heard about. And that very day, they said, "You are going into the hospital right now." We went into the hospital the next day because that was when they could get him a bed. And that day, they did exploratory surgery and they found pancreatic cancer. All of these things that his body had been exposed to over the years just ate a hole right through him. It was inflammation and it turned into pancreatic cancer. And at that moment, that rage and that anger and that not believing in anything good and kind and wonderful in this universe just took over, and it turned into this all controlling feature that just took over my life. I had to control everything because I could not afford to lose him. I could not afford to lose him. I barely made it through Stephanie's death, and then I had this little boy, that needed his dad. And then when they say pancreatic cancer, there was no place in my body or brain or soul to put the fact that he was going to die. No way. And so it was, you cannot do this to me again. I was that way with Stephanie. I was that way when my son was born. And then when my husband got that diagnosis, I was going to fight. I'm still at a loss for words for all of it, because at the time there was no place to put this where it fit in my very being.
How did you start? And he's going through radiation, he's going through chemo, he's getting weaker. How did you end up tripping across A Course in Miracles?
I was actually in college again at the time. I was at the University of Memphis, which is now, well, I was at Memphis State University, which is now University of Memphis. And there was a psychology professor there who was a very spiritual man. And he and I used to argue all the time, because he would say, bless you, and, God bless you. And he would talk about spirit. And I'd say, yeah, right. And I mean, I would have debates with him in school, just debates. And then when Steve got sick, of course, I left school because I wanted to be with Steve. And he found out, the professor found out what was going on, and he would get in touch with me. And then he said, this Course in Miracles is something that I would like you to, take. We can do it. I can come to you. We can do it any way you want to, because he knew I didn't want to leave Steve. And I remember thinking, okay, you want to sit down and you want to talk to me about miracles? You want to talk to me about God and a good universe? Sure. Bring it on, dude. I mean, it was one of these where I was in fighting mode, and I figured, I didn't stay in it for very long, because as soon as they started with the, nothing real can be lost, and, all of those metaphysical or whatever, I'm thinking, this is a bunch of bull here. And I had something that I could really dive into with him, to let him know what I thought of him and let him know what I thought of his spiritual nature. But I was so involved in keeping Steve alive that I didn't have time for all of it, because I thought it was a total waste of my time and my energy.
What happened? Thank you for sharing. What happened with your time, your energy, I guess we're really getting to surrender here,
Yes.
your everything after Steve's stroke?
Oh, that last day. I lived in the hospital with him for 6 months. That was at a time when the hospitals didn't kick you out. They let you stay for a while, and day by day by day by day, it was a daily battle to make sure that those crash carts weren't coming to us. And I did everything I could, and I was running on empty. You've heard that before. And I was just running on empty and fighting and fighting and fighting and fighting, and keeping everyone at bay and everything at bay, and not believing that anything bad was going to happen, even though it was right in front of my eyes.
Yeah.
I didn't want to see it. So that last day, it was that morning, the night before, we had had a wonderful night, and he had had a rally. And I remember thinking, this is good, but I did this. Okay, God didn't have anything to do with this. The medical community's wrong, and I'm winning this. So the next morning, he just, something was off. His breathing was off, and I knew every breath. I counted every breath for months, and whenever there was a change, I would just hop all over it. I would get the nurses and doctors and everyone in there. But that morning, there was a huge change in his breathing, and I didn't recognize it. And what was happening was that the tumors were breaking up, and they had traveled to his brain. And after the third or fourth time this happened, our oncologist, who had become a very good friend of ours, came in, and he did what oncologists do. And he said to me, he can't hear you, he can't see you, he can't feel you. Didn't want to believe him, but did want to believe him, because I knew that if he couldn't feel me, that meant I could touch him. I hadn't been able to touch him in 6 months, because every nerve fiber in his body was on fire.
The
And so
radiation.
Yeah, it was a very sad time. He used to sit up on the corner of his bed, and we would give him the sponge baths, and he'd sit right at the corner with someone behind him, make sure he didn't fall, and he'd like put his arms out like this, and I would walk into his arms, and he would rest his arms on my shoulders, and that's how we touched each other for 6 months. And that day, when they said he can't feel you, I actually crawled up in the bed behind him and just tucked my body up behind his and just held him. And I stayed that way all day. And then it was about 8 o'clock at night. I realized that I hadn't even had any water. I hadn't had anything. And our oncologist was in the room, and my parents were in the room. And Claude, that was our oncologist, he said, would I please get up so that he could just check Steve's vitals, and I said, okay. I really think he did that more for me than he did for Steve, because there hadn't been any change. And I got up and went into the bathroom. And I remember when I flicked the lights on, I was looking into the mirror, and I saw me, and I wondered who that girl was. It wasn't me. I was gray and gaunt, and the sadness that it was like someone else looking at me when really it was me looking at me, but just this sadness and emptiness in my eyes it was devastating for me to see that part of me. And at that moment, I heard my oncologist yell out something, and I won't tell you what he yelled out because it's, kind of obscene here, but it was such a shock. And I raced out of the bathroom, rounded the corner, and almost fell because it's, the linoleum floor. And what had happened was Steve had rolled over. Medical impossibility. He'd been on his back, or when I had him up on his side, but when I got out, I put him back on his back. And he had rolled over by himself, and he was laying on his right side. And I raced around to the side of the bed, and I knelt down so that I was nose to nose with him. I mean, I was so close to him that looking at him, he was kind of out of focus. When you get really close to something, you lose, it gets a little fuzzy. That's how close I was to him. And he was looking at me, and I looked into his eyes, and I knew he could see me. When someone's asleep, sometimes their eyes are kind of half open, and you can look and you can tell they're asleep.
Nobody's home. Yeah.
Nobody's home, yeah. I could see the light in his eyes, and I knew he saw me, and I looked at him, and that was such an amazing moment. You would think you would say the most profound thing ever. And the only thing that flew out of my mouth was, "What are you staring at?" Can you imagine? At a time like that, he's doing something that he's not supposed to be able to do. And I say, "What are you staring at?" Because I'm thinking, I won. I won. I beat God if he exists. I beat death. Okay? I am the victor here. And he looked at me and he said, "I just want to remember," which was another total medical impossibility. And when he said that, of course, everyone in the room was just, and I was so close to him. And when he said, "I just want to remember," I closed my eyes and I gasped. When something is so, and you go, ah, it was one of those. And he breathed out at the same time, and I could feel his breath. I could just feel it, and I knew it was his. And this whole time I'm thinking, oh, I won. And then when I opened my eyes and I looked into his, I saw that his eyes had gone dark. And it was then I knew I hadn't won anything. Hadn't won anything, that he had died. And it was then that I realized that I had taken in his last breath, and my body and my everything of me just could not handle it. I had no place to put it. And so I fell. I just slumped, you just slumped. I was already on my knees, and it was as if I didn't have any bones in my body, because that was it. And at that very moment, this all sounds like it took minutes and minutes and minutes, but it didn't. This was happening, in seconds here. And somehow I stood up. Don't know how. I have said forever and ever that I stood up by some power that wasn't mine, because I was not physically able to do it. And when I stood up, the ceiling just started to turn to mist. It was there, but it wasn't there. And the room started to change shape, and the floor started going away, even though I was standing on it. And there was a window on the side, the right side, where Steve was facing, and it just seemed to go away, and the stars were there. That's why the book's called Becoming Starlight, because the stars just came and got me. I could see, Michael, every single star was unique and distinct. I could see them each separately, and yet it was one big, just massive light. And people have asked me what color it was, and I've always said it wasn't a color because it wasn't like anything I had ever seen, so I couldn't give it an adjective to describe what it was. And I have said it was just purity, just whatever purity would have looked like on the first day of the universe. This is what that light looked like. And there was a presence, okay? I felt a presence among these stars. And it was so comforting and so inviting and so loving. I just went. Because at that moment when I slumped, there was a complete letting go of me. This egoic mind, that we all live in, we put these blinders on, and where all these labels are slapped on us from the time we're kids. And it's this divine game of hide and seek. And we stop seeking, when we're told, here's your name, here's your family, here's what you're going to be, here's how you're going to dress, here's what you're going to believe. And we stop seeking, and we fail to remember who we are. So when Steve died, all of that hit me. Stephanie's death, the hard pregnancy was with my son, Steve's death. There wasn't anything of me left. And it was this letting go that, want me to tell you what I think happened to me, why I was given this
Please.
shared death experience?
Absolutely.
At that moment when I lost me, because that's what happened, I lost me. My oncologist and my parents said that this noise came out of me that was just this guttural, and I've never been able to make that noise again, ever. Thank you, God.
Yeah.
This noise came out of me that was just this guttural, deep, from the underbelly of your soul noise. Okay? And here's what I think happened. I think it was three things why I was afforded this blessing. That noise became a sacred word for me. And somehow that noise hit just the vibrational pattern of the universe. And it was at that moment that God said, there she is. There she is. She's mine now. I got her. No more fighting, no more labels, no more nothing. She's mine. So I think it was the sacred word, which maybe took me into like a centraling prayer where my focus was on God and he heard it. You know that primal scream that only God can hear? I think that's what it was. And he came and he got me because I wasn't fighting him anymore. I belonged to him. And at the same time, I think it was Steve's love because he knew that I wasn't going to survive this. And somehow he said, okay, look, can we give her a little peek into what's happening? And this divine gift that was given to me where it was like, okay, come on. We need to stop this battle. So I kind of think it was those three things that somehow I tapped into this vibrational pattern that keeps the universe going, and this presence within the stars that I went into. I think that was, for me, that was true God. That was him taking me to him to show me that Steve was fine and Stephanie was fine and everything was exactly the way it was supposed to be. Saved my life.
And you saw Steve there, didn't you?
I did. He was standing right there in front of me. Steve was a big guy. Okay, he was 6'4", and he was a big guy. Okay, and when he died, he didn't even weigh 99 pounds. He had lost so much, and he was just, I mean, you can imagine. And there he was. He wasn't in uniform this time. He was standing there in front of me, and he had this smile on his face that was a smile that I had never seen before. I'd never seen since in anyone. it was this sense of being. He just was, and he was happy and joyful and peaceful and calm, and take all the words that you want to take, okay, that a human being would think of as being home, okay? That's what he was. That, and he was standing right in front of me. And once again, out of my mouth, came this profound saying. All I said was, "I can see you." I mean, how stupid is that? You'd think you would say something so amazingly, that people would write about for eons,
You
but no.
didn't really have time to prepare and script this out, did you,
That's
Sharon?
yeah, no, it was just sort of there. And the funny thing was, I didn't feel the need to talk to him,
Mhm.
nor did I feel the need to ask questions, nor did I feel the need to say anything. It was like I knew it. Everything was exactly the way it was supposed to be, for him, for me, for everybody.
I want to challenge you on something.
Go ahead.
Maybe it wasn't stupid. Maybe it was brilliant. When you say, "I can see you," you were seeing the divine essence.
Oh, yes, yes. You know, yes. I think you're right. I think you're right. And that carries me into when people have asked me, "Did you see God?" And my answer has always been, physically, I would have to say no.
Yeah.
And yet, spiritually and every other way that is important, the answer is yes. Because how do you define or describe love? How do you describe it? I have heard people say, talk about the magnificence and the unconditional love and all of that. You're never going to hear me say those words, unconditional love, because what I experienced was so far behind that
Yeah.
it makes, ahead of that, and it makes unconditional love look kind of silly, because I know people don't really understand that. But when you're talking about being in the presence of that divinity, that all, that everything, there aren't any words. I don't think the human mind could live in that. I don't think we're meant to live in that. And to say it was love like I had never experienced before, and that to describe God would be describing the undescribable. Make sense at all?
Yes, actually, it does. It doesn't make life even any simpler to me, but it
I
makes
know.
perfect sense. You talk about hearing a voice and you say, "I came to understand that all I believed to be true wasn't."
Wasn't. Yeah, yeah. What I found out, I believed forever, was that God was this man. Imagine, if you will, Charlton Heston in the Ten Commandments.
Yep.
Okay, that was God. He was this man that sat in a throne
Mhm.
someplace outside of us, above the clouds. No one knew exactly where, but he was waiting there, throwing, ready to throw lightning bolts at you if you did or said or whatever. Um, yeah, no, 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 no. That so misses the mark. It's not even close. What I discovered was what Wayne used to talk about, that we are that magnificent expression of God. The mystics talk about the heart of hearts. And inside each of us, inside our hearts, there is this place that they call the heart of hearts. And inside that heart, that is where the divine lives. That is where God lives. And the only other thing that is allowed in there is you. When you awaken to who you really are, when you get rid of all the stuff that's been slapped on you, when the egoic mind goes away, when there is that letting go, when there is that surrendering to that thought of God, which is what you are. And when you enter that heart of hearts, you discover who you are. And that's when you discover that you are that thought of God. The only reason we all exist is because, I'm going to say God and He because it makes it easier to talk about. Okay. But when God says, "You know what? I think I want to express me in the world this way. Zap, here's Michael." Okay. Or I want to express myself that way. And here I am. Okay. We forget that when we're born. It goes away. We don't, that's why I said it's this divine game of hide and seek, and we stop seeking because we forget how to seek.
It brings me, it's not so much the forgetting of who we are at this moment, where I'm going next, but it brings up kind of this divine gain and this divine glimpse that you were given. This has to do with shared death experiences. I'm not one who typically quotes scripture, but John 14:2, and many mansions.
Yes, 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 yes. Have you ever read Saint Teresa of Avila, her Interior Mansions? Have you ever read that book?
No, but oh my God, I must.
Oh, good Lord, you must. I learned so much. I went on a journey. I did. That's why the book's called A Journey from Darkness to Light. And I went on this journey where I had to discover what happened to me. Now, Dr. Moody, he's the one that explained it all to me, but that wasn't enough. I talked to priests and ministers and rabbis and you name it. I spent time with Buddhist monks, everybody trying to find out what I experienced and what would best describe and help me understand all of this. And her book, you got to read her book because she talks about the interior mansions and what they really are awakenings to different parts of our soul. And it is the most amazing book. You got to read it. You got to read it.
On
It's
that,
so good.
her name again?
Saint Teresa of Avila, Avila. It's Interior Mansions. It's absolutely amazing. I tell everybody to read it. It is not an easy book to read. It is not an easy book to read. She wrote this like back in the 13th century, and she was almost excommunicated and everything else because of her writings, where she talked about divine gifts and flights of spirit and ecstasies and all of these types of things, because these were happening to her. And back then, of course, if you went against what the Pope and the elders of the church said, what that wasn't so good, didn't work out so well for you. But the book is amazing, and you would love it. You would love it.
Thank you, thank you. I guess on that note, I've got a few last questions before we wrap up.
Sure,
But on that
absolutely.
note, on books, where can people go to find your beautiful book
Oh,
and to
thank
find out
you.
more?
Well, I'll tell you what, you can go to Amazon. That's
Mhm.
probably the easiest. Or you can go to my website, which is www.sharonprentice.com. You can go to Barnes& and Noble. You can go to your indie sites. You can find her just about anywhere you want to find her.
Very, very good. And if you didn't catch SharonPrentice.com, come on over to Inspire Nation Show. We'll get you over to SharonPrentice.com. I want this conversation to continue and continue and continue. I'm like, we're at the really, really good stuff. People are going to have to read the book. A few last wrap-up questions first.
Sure.
And this one, Steve talked with you about in his last sentence. What does the word remember mean to you?
Oh my gosh. That was the thing that we said to each other all the time. Um, Whenever anything wonderful would happen or anything tragic would happen, we would always say, I want to remember, because it was this soul thing that we had. And when Steve made that last sentence, it took in our whole life. And he knew then where he was going. I know he did. There's no doubt in my mind. And so for him to say to me, I want to remember, he was telling me that he wanted to remember the joy and the tragedy and all of the things that go along with our soul journeys here on this earth. I didn't understand it at the time. I thought it was just, the I want to remember me, my selfish me. But I think it was so much more than that.
I'm getting goosebumps. And I'm thinking I've had several guests on the show talking about, and Jill as one, talking about last words.
Hmm.
And I have to wonder if there was a second meaning behind that, which is they say that when people are passing on, they're going and coming and going and coming, which
Yes,
means he'd already, in a sense, become his own
yes,
starlight, whatever that was for him,
yes.
and wanting, and in that glimpse when he's back with you, he wants to remember that as well.
Yes, I absolutely believe that. There's no doubt in my mind. I've been with so many people. That's what I do. I work with terminally ill people now. And I've been with so many of them during their last months and their last days, and the conversations that go on and the things that they talk about. There's hidden meanings just everywhere. And so many people have these experiences. They're just a matter of degree. And if you pay attention to what people are saying as they die or in the days before that, and you really start looking and trying to figure out and understand what they're saying, it's life altering. It's absolutely life altering. So I absolutely agree with you. There's so much more to his I just want to remember than just I want to remember your face. That's part of it, but it wasn't all of it.
Based on the work that you're doing now and based on this shared death experience, would you have 3 tips for living that you could share with people?
Oh, sure. That's, the first thing I tell people, and it sounds so simple and so easy, is every morning when you wake up, the minute you open your eyes, smile. I don't care what's going on in your life, smile, because there's something about a smile that just sends this warmth through your whole body, and whether you're sick or hurting or no matter what's going on in your life, smile. The second thing, once again, seems very simple, but it's actually not, is to tell the people you love, I love you. I love you. And if you're lucky enough, follow it with a hug. Everyone thinks there's going to be the next minute and the next hour and the next week. And sometimes there isn't. A lot of times there isn't. And then there's regret that follows. So do that. Okay. Say, I love you and give them a hug. Even if you're mad at them and you want to punch them out, tell them you love them and hug them. And the third thing that I tell people is try and get into some type of focused prayer. Now, I use the word prayer because for me, any conversation I have with God is a prayer. Whether I'm saying, why are you doing this to me, dude? Okay. Or I don't understand what's happening, or I don't like this. Please take this away. That is a prayer to me, because my conversations with God are prayers. And I try and tell people, get into this focused state where you can focus your soul, this underbelly that I talk about all the time, where everything lives. All your emotions live there in the underbelly of your soul that we don't want to look at, because the good lives there, but the bad lives there too. And facing these issues is really difficult for people. But get into that, because that's where your healing will take place, your spiritual knowledge. It's all in there. So find that focus to get into there. That's what I tell people.
There's a line I've kind of stolen from Ram Dass, to snuggle up with. And you talk about getting comfortable with death. And I like to say, snuggle up with that discomfort, snuggle up with death, snuggle up with your fears.
Yes, you have to. We align ourselves with these thoughts, okay? And people will talk about, I'm going to get this new car next year, or I'm going to go on this vacation next year, or yeah, I'm going to die somewhere, People do not internalize their own mortality until it punches them in the gut. And then that innocence, I say that innocence is lost at that particular moment when someone sits in front of you and gives you this diagnosis, if you're lucky to get that time. That's when the innocence falls away. And for the first time in your life, you face your own mortality, where you realize, I'm mortal. I could die. And worse yet, someone you really, really love, that they could die, and there's nothing you can do about it. Yeah. So snuggling, I like that, snuggling up with death. Doesn't mean you give up hope.
No.
Doesn't mean you give up fighting. It just means you realize that you are mortal, and that makes life so precious.
That I love, and that you never forgot for 1 second when Steve was going away. That was always on the forefront, maybe even too much, if there is such a thing. But it made you hyper present. Before I end, you got 2 or 3 last things. We got to do a really quick prayer or meditation thing right before the end. Jessica, my wife producer, always wants me to ask a question for parents and their kids. What would you share for parents and their kids today?
Oh, Lord, that is one of the most difficult with your children. But I will tell you this. Listen to your child. Listen to what your child is trying to say to you. There is so much wisdom in a child who is dying, they're closer to God than we are. They haven't had too many labels, and they're not all that far away, and that abstract thinking and the intelligence has not kicked out, that youth and that exuberance and that innocence. It's still there. And so as an adult, it is the most difficult, just heart-rending, soul-wrenching thing when you're losing your child. But the goal here is to help your child, okay? So you must be as strong as you can, as hard as that is. And what makes that easier is if you listen to what your kid is trying to say to you, because they are saying to you, hey, mom, hey, dad, I'm going to be okay. Please believe this. That, I know that sounds very simplistic and you think that's impossible. You can't possibly get in there, because a parent wants to say to their child, you're going to get over this. This is going to be great. And when you do that, you negate everything that your child is trying to say to you. So listen to help make, you can fall apart afterwards, okay? But make that child's transition as easy for them as possible, because they don't have the fear of death that adults do. They don't. It's not there. And I think that's because they are closer to the divine than an adult is.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. What does abiding love mean to you?
Oh, lordy, lordy. Abiding love. I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that I am loved. No matter what I do, what I say, where I go, who I'm with, what's going on, I know that the divine in me loves me beyond measure, beyond judgment, beyond anything. And there is nothing I can do or say that would ever make that love go away. Nothing. I'm not one that quotes that much scripture either. But it even says in scripture that there is nothing that can separate us from the love of God. It's there. And we need to ease up on ourselves a little bit and stop judging ourselves, because that's where you create your own hell.
Woohoo! Any last words you want to share before we do a really brief meditation or prayer? I've had more tears in this interview than I can't
I'm
remember when, Sharon.
sorry.
No, it's beautiful tears, because you're reminding us of who we are.
It's I this has been such a journey for me, and I have found that people discount so much of their own innate wisdom,
Mhm.
and they go by what I call the egoic mind and these blinders we put on, and we don't listen to what our subconscious, if you want to use that word, is telling us. That's where the wisdom is. When the egoic mind takes over, we lose who we are, and we lose that magic that exists in all of us. And that's what I do with even my regular patients, not my terminally ill.
Mhm.
I make them face the shadows. I've talked to a lot of people who've had NDEs and all kinds of experiences, and they all talk about how they came back as angels, and they see the light. That's not what happened to me. I tell people I come back as a warrior. Okay, I'm Michael with the spear. Okay, and I see the darkness, and I want to uncover that darkness so that the light can come out. So I tell people, pay attention, find the darkness, face it, get it out, and then you find your light, and you can live the way you're meant to live, as that amazing thought of God.
Woohoo! I do automatic writing each morning where I go into conversation with God, more or less,
Yes,
and I write, and that was the topic this morning. So was leaning into
yes,
the darkness and the shadow side, the shadow
yes,
self.
because that's what keeps us from being who we're meant to be. And we don't want to face it because we're afraid of it. And the funny thing is, we overthink so much, and all of the things that we think are going to happen, all the bad things. And you know how much of that actually happens? Very, very little. And we drive ourselves to these horrible places, the anxieties and these dark, dark issues that keep us from loving the way we're supposed to love. And loving ourselves is the biggest problem that a lot of us have, but we will not face these things because we are so afraid of them. And just kicking that fear to the curb is so important, because then you can live out loud instead of simply existing.
Thank you. Before we started, this kind of brings it full circle. I got an email or something in this morning, something I've got to take care of that's important, but it'll work itself out. And as I said, it's all story. It's
Yes.
all just the story.
That's all it is. That's all it is. And recognizing it and not being afraid of it is what lets you open that door and take that step out that door every morning. Not hiding yourself, which most of us do.
So from there, would you have a brief meditation? You had mentioned dropping us into the silence, I believe, at the beginning.
Yeah.
Would you mind doing that as long as we're not driving down the road?
Right. Yeah, as long as you're not driving down the road. One of the things that I try and teach all of my patients, all of them, is a focused type of, once again, I'm going to use your prayer. You can call it meditation. You can call it anything you want. And in order to get into that, you have to learn how to be still. None of us know how to be still. In Scripture, it also says, be still and know. And it is in that knowing that you can find your divine. So I have people sit very, very still in whatever position they want to sit. I don't care if your legs are crossed. I don't care if you're on the floor. I don't care if you're laying down. I don't care how you are. And just try and quiet the mind. And the first thought that comes to your mind, there's going to be a word. Concentrate on that word. That, if it makes you feel peace, if all of a sudden you feel love or you feel warmth going through your body, repeat that word. Very, very quiet meditation never worked for me, but repeat that word. Concentrate on that word. Get it to bring you into the present, because it is in the present time that you will find your divine self, and that will help uncover everything that needs to be uncovered. And it's like centering prayer. It brings you into the presence of God. And when you can bring yourself into the presence of God, you bring yourself into your heart of hearts, and you find yourself, that awakening begins, and you realize, wow, this is who I am, and I am so very, very loved. Just sit there with that for a minute and think about Michael being that amazing, loving expression of God in this world, and what you have to bring to everyone. And then you can very quietly say thank you, the gratitude. And know that you're loved. Deep breath. And that's what I try and tell everybody. Come into the present. Surrendering, letting go is not failure. That's success. That's success.
Woohoo!
This was great. I so love talking to you. You're just such a spiritual being. I can just feel it. I can see it in your face. You're just great. You're great.
You as well. This has been so, so special, Sharon. I am not usually this chill, this subdued. My editor is going to have to, cranking up the volume so people can hear it. But this has been so, so beautiful. Thank you for your work. Thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for the light that you're bringing to the world.
Well, I can't take credit for it. I can't take credit for it. It was something that was given to me that I just had to continue it on.
I call it the two-step dance. It may have been gifted to you, but you are stepping forward and doing the work, and that can't be taken away from you.
No, I didn't have a choice to do it. It's one of those things that you just push. And that's the way it happened.
So thank you so much again, Sharon. I'm going to crank it back up for the finish. For everyone out there, this is Michael Sandler saying, be well, have fun, get becoming starlight, and begin remembering who you truly are today, and shine bright. Woohoo! Thank you so much, Sharon.
Oh, you are brilliant. You really are. You made it very, very easy. You did. I gotta say, I got more emotional in this one than I have in some of the other ones, just looking at your face, because I could see, yeah, but you're so good, and I love your shows. Oh my God, they're so good. They're so good.
Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like below. Also, leave your comments. Have some real fun with it. Subscribe to our channel where you're going to get more great videos, more interviews coming up. And check out our website, inspirenationshow.com. That's where you'll find tips, blogs, information, videos you won't find anywhere else, and useful and helpful resources to really help you kickstart your life and to shine bright. Thanks so much again. Thank you for your support. Like, comment, subscribe. See the website. Thanks so much and have fun. Of course, shine bright. Woohoo!